In socialist East Germany, factories produced everything from tiny passenger cars to heavy trucks. Most people today remember the quirky little Trabant or the sturdy Wartburg. But there was another machine, less famous, yet far more enduring. A small van that became the backbone of everyday life in the GDR. Its name was Barkas, and its story is woven deep into the legacy of Germany's pre-war engineering. And in this video, I'll take you through that story. To tell the story properly, we have to go back, not just a few decades, but all the way to the 19th century. It was in the late 1800s that a young man of Danish origin, Jørgen Skafte Rasmussen, earned his engineering degree in Germany. Instead of returning to his homeland, he decided to settle in Saxony. In 1904, Rasmussen, together with his business partner, Karl Ernst, founded the company Ernst & Rasmussen in the city of Chemnitz, manufacturing and selling steam engines and spare parts. Just 2 years later, in 1906, Rasmussen acquired a factory in the town of Schopau and moved production there. When the First World War began, Rasmussen's company obtained military contracts. The production of detonators allowed the firm to expand rapidly, and by the end of 1915, Rasmussen employed around 480 workers. But after the First World War, interest in steam engines quickly faded. Rasmussen adapted. He shifted his focus to motorcycles, after acquiring the rights to a small two-stroke engine designed by Hugo Ruppe. It displaced just 18 cubic centimeters and produced a mere 0.25 horsepower, but it was a commercial success. The small petrol engine was marketed under the name Des Knaben Wunsch, a boy's wish. From that phrase came the abbreviation DKW. Under this name, Rasmussen's company grew into the world's largest producer of small petrol engines for bicycles, and later became one of Germany's leading manufacturers of mopeds and motorcycles. By the late 1920s, business was thriving. DKW had become arguably the most popular German brand of both cars and two-wheelers. The next step was to expand. A new factory was opened in the town of Frankenberg, producing components for DKW machines. It was called Framo, but Framo didn't stop at parts. Using DKW motorcycle components as a base, the factory began building light three-wheeled delivery trucks, and soon afterward, small four-wheeled lorries as well. Production reached over 5,000 vehicles a year, with payloads ranging from 0.5 to 1.2 tons. By the late 1930s, the Saxon enterprise had become one of Germany's leading manufacturers of light commercial vehicles. Then came the Second World War. Like so many German plants, Framo was repurposed in the early 1940s for the production of components for the military industry. And the outcome of the war brought an abrupt and brutal ending. After 1945, much of the factory's machinery and equipment was dismantled and shipped to the Soviet Union as part of war reparations. In the early post-war years, what remained of the former Framo plant in Saxony was little more than a makeshift repair workshop. But in 1949, the site was nationalized and incorporated into the newly created state-run industrial network IFA. The remnants of Germany's pre-war automotive industry were considered an important sector for the economy of the socialist GDR. At the same time, the decision to produce any specific type of vehicle was not made locally. Approval came collectively from all member states of the Council for Mutual Economic Assistance, the Comecon, which included East Germany. Renamed Werk Framo Heineken, the factory began the 1950s by building the Framo V501, a small truck powered by a two-cylinder, two-stroke engine based on pre-war designs. It also produced a more modern model, the Framo V901. The East German automotive industry, much like that of socialist Czechoslovakia, went through multiple rounds of restructuring. As part of these changes, in 1958, the former Framo plant was renamed VEB Barkas Werke Heineken, The abbreviation VEB, Volkseigener Betrieb, or People's Enterprise, became standard across the GDR's post-war machine building sector, as small and medium plants were consolidated into larger industrial combines. By the early 1950s, the young socialist state faced a clear need for light delivery trucks. At first, this demand was covered by restarting production of pre-war Framo models. But neither those trucks nor the more modern V9012 could meet the requirements of a new era. The government instructed the design team in Karl Marx Stadt to develop an entirely new generation of light commercial vehicles. From the outset, the plan was ambitious. The same platform would support both all-metal panel vans and open-bed trucks. And the engineering approach was far more progressive than anything Framo had built before. A forward control cab-over layout, independent torsion bar suspension, front-wheel drive, a load-bearing monocoque body. For the mid-1950s, this was an impressive list of innovations. The new model would carry the same name as the factory itself, Barkas. To speed up development and reduce production costs, the government chose to standardize components across the GDR's automotive industry. As a result, the Barkas was equipped with a 3-cylinder, 2-stroke engine borrowed from the Wartburg 311. The compact 966cc unit produced around 37 horsepower, modest by any measure, but adequate for a light delivery truck with a 1-ton payload. By 1956, the first prototypes of the all-metal van were built. Soon, they were joined by a variety of minibus versions for different uses. The Barkas would soon take on a wide range of tasks, hauling small cargo, carrying passengers, and even serving in specialized roles such as ambulances and fire service vehicles. And then there was its appearance. On paper, a utilitarian cab-over van should not evoke much emotion. A box on wheels, little more than a moving refrigerator. Yet the work of East German designers gave the Barkas a surprisingly well-balanced look. Clean lines, correct proportions, and a restrained simplicity that felt almost timeless. This understated, coherent design proved so solid that passing trends and fleeting fashions never made the Barkas look outdated. Throughout its production run, it remained very much a product of its era, never flashy, but never out of place. The flip side of that clarity was a near-total resistance to cosmetic upgrades or modernizations. Even today, the Barkas, with its rounded headlights and soft curves, feels approachable rather than antiquated. And in the early 1960s, it looked not only attractive but genuinely modern, standing shoulder to shoulder with its Western counterpart, the Volkswagen T1. In fact, some would argue the East German van was, in certain ways, even more refined. But let's step back for a moment. It was in the summer of 1961 that full-scale production of the Barkas finally began.
Wir hatten exportiert an Österreich.
Right from the start, the van received a new heart, the AWE 312 engine. Its displacement had been increased by a few dozen cubic centimeters, and its output rose to 42 horsepower. Even so, considering the Barkas's cargo and passenger duties, this figure was modest at best. But the East German automotive industry simply had no better option at the time. Despite that, the model earned high praise from professionals. At a curb weight of just 1,200 kilograms, the Barkas could carry almost as much again in payload. Thanks to its cab-over layout and front-wheel drive, the all-metal body offered nearly 6 cubic meters of cargo space. The absence of a drive shaft and the use of torsion bar suspension resulted in a low, perfectly flat floor, a practical advantage for loading and unloading. By the mid-1960s, the lineup had expanded. A flatbed truck on a ladder frame and an 8-seat minibus joined the original van. Over time, the vehicle also gained incremental technical upgrades, a dual-circuit braking system, an electric windshield washer, and other refinements. And yet, even as the Barkas proved itself successful, engineers were already searching for its replacement. The first attempt came in 1969, when a prototype known as the Barkas B1000 taxi bus was built on the standard chassis. That same year, work began on a far more ambitious successor. Over the next 8 years, only 3 prototypes were built, all but ready for production. 2 were fitted with imported Soviet aluminum 4-cylinder engines from the Moskvich 412, while the third retained the familiar Wartburg 2-stroke. Their payload ranged from 1,100 to 1,300 kilograms, and during testing they covered nearly 30,000 kilometers. Yet the project was abandoned for lack of funding. The prototypes were officially slated for scrapping, but Barkas employees quietly dismantled and hid them. After German reunification, 2 of these vehicles were restored and placed in the Frankenberg Museum. Meanwhile, in 1972, the ever-reliable Barkas finally received another new heart, the Wartburg 353 engine. Throughout the 1970s, the van went through a series of upgrades to meet evolving safety regulations and emission standards. Barkas models gained seatbelts for the driver and front passenger, new lighting units, an alternator, a cable-operated clutch instead of hydraulic, improved steering components, and a revised fuel system. By the early 1980s, the technical side of the Barkas had been significantly modernized. And in 1983, the B1000 finally received an exterior update. In truth, only a true enthusiast could immediately tell the difference. The so-called 83 and 84 versions were distinguished mainly by new bumpers with rubber strips and the addition of front fog lights. At its peak, the factory in Heineken assembled up to 8,000 Barkas vehicles per year. Production peaked in the mid-1970s. In 1980, the 100,000th Barkas rolled off the line. By 1987, total production had reached 150,000 units. Vans, minibuses, and light trucks that had become a familiar sight across the GDR and beyond. But new times were approaching for East Germany. And just as with the Wartburg and the Trabant, political change in the late 1980s brought technical upgrades to the Barkas, while paradoxically leading to its decline. By 1989, factories in the GDR were already producing Volkswagen Golf engines under license. Following the same policy, the Barkas received another new power unit, a 1.3-liter, 4-cylinder, 4-stroke petrol engine rated at 58 horsepower. As with the debut of the first Barkas in 1962, the updated model was presented at the Leipzig Trade Fair in 1989, and full-scale production began in 1990. However, the market reality after German reunification was unforgiving. Even with a new engine, the Barkas design itself was outdated and could not compete. A massive influx of used vehicles from West Germany, among them countless Volkswagen T2 vans and other light trucks, made the aging Barkas unattractive. East German customers were already saturated with Barkas vehicles after decades of use, and Western buyers simply had no interest in such a product. As a result, the production run of the updated Barkas was very short. Fewer than 2,000 units were built before production ceased in 1991. In total, over 3 decades of manufacturing in Heineken, more than 177,000 Barkas vehicles were produced. Vans, minibuses, and light trucks that became part of East Germany's everyday life, and later part of its history. Despite its modest power and purely utilitarian nature, the Barkas played a far greater role than its size or specifications might suggest. For decades, it became an indispensable workhorse of East German life, delivering goods, serving as ambulances and fire vehicles, and quietly helping to rebuild a country scarred by war. In many towns and villages, it was the familiar face of everyday logistics, a symbol of reliability in an otherwise limited automotive landscape. That legacy has not been forgotten in its historical homeland. Even today, surviving examples of the Barkas are carefully preserved and often restored with pride. You're most likely to encounter them in the eastern regions of Germany, where they appear at vintage car rallies and community festivals as nostalgic old-timers, kept in excellent technical condition by dedicated enthusiasts. For many people, the sight and sound of a Barkas is not just a reminder of a vehicle, but of an entire chapter in German history.